At my grandmother's trust reading, my mother grabbed my arm under the conference table. Her nails dug in as she whispered, "If you get a single penny, I will make your life a living hell." I'm Tessa, 26. I just stared ahead at the wood-paneled wall of the lawyer's office in our lakeside town near Traverse City. The lawyer droned through the first 5 pages of the estate. Every major asset checked off my mother's list. The lakeside house? Hers. The investment accounts? Hers. The summer rental cabin? Hers. Even the family heirlooms and jewelry were left entirely to her discretion to distribute. She clearly thought she had won. I noticed her triumphant posture, adjusting her expensive jacket, shooting me a condescending glare, and smugly touching my grandmother's vintage bracelet she already wore on her wrist. Then, the lawyer paused. He set the stack down and picked up a separate document. "Before we close the trust, I need to read the final page. It's an instruction page signed just days before your grandmother passed." My mother's confident smirk vanished instantly, the color draining from her face. "Before we get into my story, let me know what time you are watching and what city you are in, so I know how far my story has traveled. If stories about family secrets, final wishes, and toxic people finally being exposed keep you watching, stay with me and subscribe only if this one earns it." A few months before that room went silent, Grandma called me while I was finishing my work at the clinic. It was late Tuesday afternoon, and the physical therapy clinic near Traverse City was quiet. As an insurance claims coordinator, I spent my days battling providers and organizing patient files. I had lived on my own for years, paying my bills and navigating adult life independently. My computer monitor illuminated the folders on my desk when my phone buzzed. Seeing the caller ID, I answered immediately. Grandma Margaret's voice came through the speaker, sounding frail but remarkably sharp. She skipped the usual pleasantries entirely. "Don't believe what your mother says about the papers," she instructed, her tone carrying an urgent weight. I paused, holding a yellow highlighter midair. "Grandma, what papers? Are you okay?" She ignored my concern, pressing on with a quiet intensity. "If she tells you I changed my mind, ask Mr. Lane to read the last page. Promise me you will do that." "Who is Mr. Lane?" "Grandma, you're scaring me," I replied, staring out the window at the darkening parking lot. Instead of answering, she abruptly shifted the conversation to mundane topics, as if someone had just walked into her room. Her voice lightened artificially. She asked how the clinic was doing and if my tiny downtown apartment was staying warm enough. She wondered if the lake tourist season was winding down yet. And then, with a hint of genuine nostalgia, she asked if I still made that roasted tomato soup she loved so much. Her sudden pivot left my head spinning. Listening to her talk, my mind drifted to how much Margaret had shaped my life. She was the one who patiently taught me how to swim in the freezing lake waters. She babysat me through countless evenings when my mother, Sheila, was busy attending social events. Most importantly, she was the one who sat me down at the kitchen table, teaching me how to organize important mail, file bills, and secure crucial documents. "I still make the soup, Grandma," I said softly. "I can bring you some this week." Before I could finish the sentence, a different voice cut through the line. It was Sheila. "Margaret is very tired now," my mother snapped, the phone rustling as she clearly pulled it away. "You shouldn't be stressing her out with long conversations at this hour." "I wasn't stressing her," I protested, my grip tightening on the receiver. "She called me." "Well, she needs to rest. Do not call her directly anymore and disturb her," Sheila warned sharply, followed by the immediate click of the line going dead. I sat in the quiet office, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The interaction felt incredibly wrong. Grandma Margaret had always been fiercely independent. She always answered her own landline and never let anyone manage her schedule. Over the next 4 days, I tried calling her house repeatedly. Every single time, it went straight to voicemail, or Sheila would intercept the call, offering vague excuses about my grandmother sleeping or resting. My anxiety mounted with each blocked attempt. Finally, on Saturday morning, my phone chimed with a text message. It wasn't from Margaret. It was from Sheila, delivering a clear, icy directive that sent a shiver down my spine. "Your grandmother needs peace, not your questions." By the following week, every normal way to reach Grandma had a rule attached to it. I knew exactly where Margaret was staying. She had been moved to Bayview Pines Care Center, a highly reputable medical facility nestled near the lake. It was an upscale place, meaning it operated strictly by the book. They had a formal front desk, a meticulously maintained visitor list, an emergency contact hierarchy, and a strict policy against unauthorized guests if the primary contact restricted access. Determined to see her, I drove there straight after finishing my shift at the clinic. The lobby was quiet, smelling faintly of lavender and hospital-grade sanitizer. I walked up to the reception counter and gave the attendant my grandmother's room number. The woman tapped on her keyboard, frowned, and then offered an apologetic smile. She informed me that my name was entirely absent from the approved visitor log. Before I could argue the absurd policy, a familiar figure stepped out from the adjacent waiting lounge. It was Grant. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene in the tranquil lobby, but his physical presence alone was designed to apply pressure. He walked over slowly, hands tucked into his slacks. "Sheila has already handled everything with the administration," Grant said, his tone perfectly measured but dismissive. "Margaret is resting, and she really doesn't need any unnecessary family stress right now. You should just go home." I stood my ground, refusing to call him anything other than Grant. He wasn't acting like a father. He was acting like a bouncer. But the facility staff were already watching us closely, and I knew pushing the issue would only get me escorted out by security. Defeated, I turned around and walked back through the sliding glass doors. As soon as I sat in my car, my phone lit up with a long text message. It was from April. The text was incredibly harsh, instantly blaming me for adding unnecessary pressure on our mother during a difficult time. April wrote that Sheila had sacrificed so much to arrange the best care possible and demanded that I stop showing up unexpectedly to cause drama. Reading the glaring screen, a bitter realization washed over me. April had absolutely no idea what was really happening. She only knew the meticulously crafted version of the story Sheila had fed her. I didn't reply. Instead, I waited 3 days and tried a different approach. I returned to the care center during the busy lunch hour, hoping a shift change might work in my favor. It didn't. The midday staff was just as rigid, and I was blocked once again. Refusing to leave empty-handed, I purchased a bright bouquet of yellow tulips and a small greeting card. I handed them to the front desk attendant, firmly asking her to deliver the items to Margaret's room. She took them with a nod, but I had zero guarantee my grandmother would ever actually receive them. While I lingered near the exit, feeling completely helpless, I noticed a caregiver from the evening shift watching me. She was standing by the staff room door, her eyes fixed on me for a long, calculating moment. She didn't say a word, and neither did I. I finally walked out into the chilly autumn parking lot. When I reached my vehicle, I saw something small fluttering against the windshield. Someone had quickly tucked a tiny, folded piece of paper underneath the wiper blade. The small note read, "She knows you came." I kept that note folded behind my driver's license because it was the first proof that I had not imagined everything. While I didn't immediately jump to conclusions about which staff member had risked slipping it onto my windshield, the tiny piece of paper validated my growing suspicions. It forced me to be strategic. The very next morning, I picked up my phone and dialed Helen Price, a longtime friend of my grandmother from their local church group. I hoped she might have some insight into Margaret's sudden isolation. When Helen answered, her tone was unexpectedly frosty. I quickly explained that I hadn't been able to see my grandmother. Helen sighed heavily, revealing a twisted narrative that made my blood run cold. She told me that Sheila had been crying to the entire congregation, claiming I was far too consumed by my clinic job to bother visiting. According to Sheila, Margaret was deeply heartbroken over my supposedly cold and distant behavior. I sat in stunned silence, gripping the edge of my kitchen counter. My mother hadn't just blocked my physical access to the facility. She had proactively spun a vicious lie, weaponizing my forced absence to paint herself as the devoted daughter and me as the ungrateful grandchild. Needing a concrete paper trail, I drove straight to the post office and sent a certified letter directly to my grandmother's room. I paid for the tracking service and carefully filed the printed receipt in my wallet. 5 days later, that same envelope appeared in my mailbox, entirely unopened. The tracking sticker showed a fascinating timeline. It had an initial received signature from the facility's mailroom, followed by a harsh red stamp declaring it returned to sender by the explicit demand of the primary contact. This wasn't paranoia anymore. It was documented interference. I took the mangled envelope to a neon-lit diner downtown to meet my friend Caroline. She slid into the booth, ordered 2 coffees, and listened intently as I laid the physical evidence on the sticky table. Caroline was practical and fiercely protective. She didn't offer endless sympathy. Instead, she gave me strict instructions to hoard every single text, receipt, and piece of mail in a secure folder. Later that evening, while sorting laundry in my quiet apartment, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification from an unknown number. I hadn't heard it ring. I pressed play, holding the speaker tightly against my ear. Through a haze of static, Grandma Margaret's voice emerged. She sounded incredibly weak, her breath catching between words. But her mind was undeniably lucid. "Tessa, if this reaches you, I need you to know I asked for you," she whispered urgently. Before I could even process the relief of hearing her, the background audio shifted. There was the distinct squeak of a heavy door swinging open, followed by the muffled thud of rubber-soled footsteps entering the room. Margaret's pace suddenly doubled, her words tumbling out in a panicked rush. "Sheila brought papers before I understood what they changed," she breathed into the receiver. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled to hit the export button, immediately emailing a digital copy of the audio file to my own secure inbox. As the progress bar filled on my screen, the recording captured one final chilling sound. A faint, unfamiliar woman's voice spoke from somewhere in the background, her tone hushed but firm. "Mrs. Ellis, we have to stop now." The call that Grandma was gone came before sunrise, before I had even turned off my alarm. It was Sheila on the line. Her voice was remarkably cold, delivering the information as if she were dictating a corporate schedule rather than mourning a parent. She informed me of the exact time of the memorial service, dictated that I should wear something appropriately muted, and sternly warned me not to cause any unnecessary scenes. She offered no gentle words, and I didn't ask for any. The memorial was held 2 days later at a modest community hall situated on a small bluff overlooking the lake. When I arrived, the somber room was already filled with the soft, echoing murmurs of gathered friends and the heavy, stifling scent of white lilies. At the front of the hall, Sheila was delivering a masterful performance. She stood vigil next to a large portrait of Margaret, gracefully accepting condolences from the local residents. I overheard her tearfully telling a neighbor how she had sat by her mother's side every single day, seamlessly weaving in a tragic narrative about how Margaret passed away, carrying the deep sorrow that I had chosen my career over my family. Standing loyally by our mother's side, April absorbed every fabricated word. When my sister finally made eye contact with me, her gaze was brimming with profound disappointment. Helen Price was seated in the second row. When I walked past, the older woman deliberately averted her eyes, completely bought into the fiction. Grant intercepted me before I could even reach the refreshment table. He leaned in uncomfortably close, his voice dropping to a harsh, controlling whisper. "Today is not the day for drama," he cautioned, adjusting his expensive tie. "Do not do anything to embarrass Sheila today. She has been through enough." I bit my tongue, refusing to give him the satisfaction of an argument. As I retreated toward the very back row to find an empty folding chair, a familiar figure brushed past my shoulder. It was the evening shift worker from the care center. She didn't pause for small talk or offer any overt condolences. Instead, she swiftly pressed a crisp white envelope into my palm and immediately exited through the rear doors, melting into the cloudy afternoon. Seeking a private moment, I stepped into the empty hallway and tore the envelope open. Inside was a single folded photocopy of an official visitor log. My hands trembled as I scanned the grid. My own name was clearly printed on 2 separate dates. Next to my signature, written in bold red ink, was a glaring administrative note. Not approved by primary contact, access denied. It was undeniable, physical proof that someone inside the facility knew the absolute truth. Later that evening, after the exhausting charade concluded, I opened my laptop in the solitude of my apartment. Sitting in my inbox was a formal email from the law offices of Victor Lane. It was an official summons requesting my presence at the upcoming trust reading. Before I could process the legal document, my phone rang. Sheila's name flashed across the screen. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a word. "I know you got the email from the lawyer," she stated, stripping away the grieving widow persona entirely. Her tone was sharp, victorious, and terrifyingly certain. "You can attend if you really want to humiliate yourself, but everything is already settled." Margaret knew who was truly there for her at the end. I remained silent, letting her words hang in the air. "There is nothing for you, Tessa," Sheila finalized, her voice dripping with venom. "I made sure of that." Mr. Lane's office sat above a marina supply store, close enough to the lake that I could hear boat lines tapping against metal poles. When I walked into the stuffy, sunlit conference room, the air was already thick with a tense, unspoken hierarchy. We were all gathered around a heavy mahogany table. Sheila sat at the head, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit. Pinned securely to her lapel was Margaret's vintage emerald brooch, a bold accessory she had brazenly claimed before the estate was even legally divided. Grant sat to her right, nervously tapping his shoe, while my sister April and Helen Price occupied the adjacent seats. Aunt Marlene, my grandmother's oldest surviving relative, sat quietly in the corner, clutching a tissue. Victor Lane took his place at the head of the table, opening a thick leather binder. He adjusted his glasses and began reading the primary sections of the estate distribution. Listening to the legalese unfold was like watching a meticulously planned heist play out in slow motion. Mr. Lane systematically went through the extensive list of assets with a monotonous, unwavering tone. The sprawling lakeside property was deeded entirely to my mother. The highly profitable summer rental cabin was also legally transferred to her name. The substantial investment portfolios were routed directly into Sheila's personal accounts. Furthermore, the sole authority to process, sell, or distribute all remaining family heirlooms and personal property was granted exclusively to her. Across the table, Grant visibly exhaled. His shoulders dropped, and the profound relief washing over his face was impossible to miss. I knew why. That massive influx of capital was the exact lifeline he and Sheila desperately needed to quietly erase the mounting joint debts they had accumulated over the past decade. Beside him, April shot me a lingering, condescending look, her expression practically screaming that my presence here was completely pointless and my so-called abandonment had been rightfully punished. Empowered by the reading, Sheila couldn't resist taking the floor. She folded her hands primly over the polished wood and addressed the room, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed sorrow. "I just want everyone to know how incredibly difficult these last few months have been," Sheila announced, looking directly at Aunt Marlene before turning her cold eyes on me. "I sacrificed my career, my personal time, and my own health to ensure Margaret was cared for. It broke her heart every single day to know that some family members chose their clinic schedules over spending time with her. She died carrying that profound sadness, wondering why she had been abandoned." A hot wave of anger rushed into my throat. I desperately wanted to shout, to slam my hands on the table and expose the vicious manipulation. But I forced myself to bite my inner cheek. Reacting with raw emotion would only validate her narrative and paint me as the hysterical, bitter granddaughter causing a scene. Instead, I grounded myself by mentally cataloging the hidden weapons I possessed. I thought about the certified mail receipt safely tucked in my wallet. I visualized the undeniably restricted visitor log and the red ink securely saved as a digital scan on my phone. I remembered the panicked, breathless voicemail where Grandma Margaret explicitly warned me about changed papers. I just didn't know if those fragmented pieces of evidence were legally substantial enough to combat a professionally drafted, binding document. Victor Lane let Sheila's dramatic monologue fade into the quiet room. He didn't offer any sympathetic nods. He didn't close the leather binder either. Instead, the lawyer reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a separate, sealed gray envelope. He placed his hand flat against the heavy paper. Sheila's self-righteous posture evaporated instantly. Her eyes locked onto the unexpected document, and a visible tremor traveled down her arm as she reached nervously for the emerald brooch on her lapel. The carefully constructed atmosphere of victory shattered in a matter of seconds. Victor Lane cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses once more, and looked directly at my mother. His expression was entirely unreadable. Mrs. Hart, the first 5 pages were not the final instruction. When Mr. Lane opened the gray envelope, Sheila stopped touching Grandma's brooch. The lawyer withdrew a single legally stamped document, his demeanor shifting from monotonous to rigorously professional. He explained that this was a late amendment, an overriding instruction page executed entirely independently of the original distribution plan. Margaret explicitly confirmed that she signed the previous asset division under immense emotional pressure and undue influence, Mr. Lane read, his voice cutting clearly through the thick silence of the room. She requested the immediate creation of a separate, protected trust for Tessa. Furthermore, the amendment contains a specific trigger clause. If verifiable evidence exists proving that the primary medical contact prevented Tessa from communicating with her, or deliberately misrepresented Tessa's absence to others, the entirety of the primary estate, the lakeside house, the cabin, and the investment accounts, will be instantly redirected from Sheila Hart and deposited into Tessa's trust. The room inhaled sharply. This wasn't merely a whimsical change of heart. It was a legally binding trap designed specifically to penalize isolation and manipulation. "That is absurd! She was completely out of her mind," Sheila sputtered, her composed facade cracking into genuine panic. "She didn't even know what day it was. I was the one taking care of her." "Actually, Mrs. Hart, we anticipated that exact defense," Mr. Lane countered smoothly. He tapped the thick file beneath the envelope. "This trust was executed with an independent notary. It includes a comprehensive physician's note officially evaluating and confirming Margaret's absolute mental capacity. We also have a sworn witness statement, certified mail receipts proving rejected correspondence, and the facility's official visitor logs attached directly to this file." Right on cue, the heavy conference room door opened. The evening shift caregiver stepped inside, removing her coat. "This is Teresa Collins." Mr. Lane introduced her properly for the first time. She was Margaret's primary evening nurse. Teresa stood tall, her hands folded neatly in front of her as she looked directly at my mother. Margaret was entirely lucid during every single one of her consultations with the legal team, she stated firmly. She asked for Tessa constantly. I personally verified that Tessa's name was actively blocked from the visitor list by the primary contact. I didn't bypass medical privacy laws, but I did follow standard legal protocols to submit my witness statement and the administrative visitor logs directly to Mr. Lane when Margaret requested it. To eliminate any remaining shadow of a doubt, Mr. Lane pulled out a small digital recorder and pressed play. It was a short, devastatingly clear snippet of the voicemail. "Tessa, I need you to know I tried to reach you." Grandma's voice echoed through the speaker, frail but resolute. The impact was instantaneous and catastrophic for Sheila. In the second row, Helen Price gasped, pressing a hand over her mouth as she realized the horrifying extent of the lies she had been fed. Grant, recognizing that his financial salvation had just vanished into thin air, physically took a step away from his wife, his face pale with dread. April sat frozen in her chair, her eyes wide with shock. The sheer weight of the truth crushed the resentment she had harbored against me. She had sent me those hateful texts based entirely on a fabricated narrative. "I will contest this in court," Sheila shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "I will tie this estate up for years. You cannot do this to me." Mr. Lane remained unbothered. "You have every right to consult your own legal counsel, Mrs. Hart," he replied evenly. "However, I must warn you that the documentation supporting this trust is ironclad. The financial cost of litigation, combined with an impossibly high burden of proof on your end, will be astronomical." For the first time since I sat down, I finally found my voice. I didn't yell, and I didn't cry. My tone was terrifyingly calm, carrying the weight of total vindication. "You intentionally locked me out, Sheila," I said, looking right into her panicked eyes. "You prevented me from seeing my own grandmother in her final months, and then you used my forced absence as a weapon to accuse me of abandoning her. You did this to yourself." A suffocating silence fell over the mahogany table. No one moved to comfort my mother. Then, April slowly turned her head toward the head of the table. Her voice trembled, stripped of all its former confidence. Mom, did you know she came? The fallout started before Sheila even made it out of the parking lot. I watched through the glass doors as she desperately tried to pull April toward her SUV. My sister planted her feet on the asphalt, yanking her arm away with undeniable disgust. I couldn't hear the exact words through the thick glass, but April's rigid posture and furious gestures made her demand perfectly clear. She wanted a direct, honest answer about whether Sheila knew I had tried to visit the care center. Instead of admitting the harsh truth, Sheila threw her hands up defensively, immediately playing the wounded victim and loudly claiming that her own family was suddenly turning against her. In that precise moment, under the gray autumn sky, the lifelong illusion broke. April finally recognized the deep manipulation she had been blinded to for years. Over the next few weeks, reality systematically dismantled Sheila's carefully constructed world. She furiously contacted numerous attorneys across Traverse City and Grand Rapids, but not a single reputable firm would take her case once they reviewed Mr. Lane's ironclad files. At home, the financial devastation hit them incredibly hard. Grant exploded in an unprecedented fit of anger because they were quietly drowning in mounting high-interest credit card debt and massive home renovation loans. They had blindly, arrogantly assumed Margaret's estate money would effortlessly cover their reckless spending. The ensuing arguments became so intensely volatile that Grant furiously packed a duffel bag and temporarily moved into his younger brother's house just to escape the toxic environment. Her social standing collapsed just as quickly. Helen Price didn't scream or start a public feud. She simply, quietly, told the undeniable truth to the local church group. Sheila's pristine, righteous reputation fractured overnight. Meanwhile, April moved out of her childhood bedroom to stay with a friend and blocked our mother's number completely. As for the trust, I didn't rush to immediately liquidate the substantial assets. I hired a reliable, professional property management company to handle the daily operations of the summer rental cabin. I kept the beautiful lakeside house exactly as it was, filling the sunlit living room with the few sentimental belongings of Grandma Margaret's that genuinely mattered to me. I used a reasonable, modest portion of the investment funds to entirely clear my own personal debts, happily continuing my quiet, independent life without ever needing to flaunt my inherited wealth to anyone. Most importantly, I established an impenetrable wall between my new life and their toxicity. I blocked both Sheila and Grant on all my personal devices and social platforms. I explicitly directed that any legally required estate communication absolutely had to go entirely through Victor Lane's law office. I firmly refused all subsequent invitations from extended relatives to attend supposed family meetings, designed to sweep the trauma under the rug. When Sheila eventually sent a lengthy, manipulative email filled with vague, non-apologetic excuses that still carefully avoided admitting her calculated lies, I simply deleted it without typing a single word in response. There would be no grand, cinematic reconciliation. Sometimes, the most profound lesson you can learn is that not every family story requires an ending filled with forgiveness. Setting strict boundaries isn't an act of revenge, it is an act of fundamental self-preservation. When toxic people try to use the word family as a weapon to force your silence, you always have the absolute right to choose the truth instead. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way to the end. If you have ever had to make the difficult decision to cut contact or establish boundaries with a toxic relative, please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I would genuinely love to read them. Ultimately, I didn't win simply because I inherited the lake house or the investment accounts. I won because Sheila permanently lost the power to tell my story for me.